Hello, I'm Evan Watson, and welcome to The Story. Tonight, we break down the money behind the upcoming election and the earthquake threat in the Northwest. But first, to a schism in local government, one that, for the moment, is more political than practical, but it's still tonight's big story. For the past few months, the city of Portland has been considering a divorce from Multnomah County when it comes to working on homelessness. This week, Portland took the first steps in filing for that divorce. 3 city commissioners agreed to draft an ordinance that would terminate the Intergovernmental Agreement, or IGA. That funds the Joint Office of Homeless Services. The scorned county, which stands to lose about $90 million in city money over the next 3 years, is not taking it well. The city and the county have been working together under the joint office since 2016. But lately, those city commissioners say it hasn't felt much like a joint effort. Under the current IGA, the city sends around $30 million a year to the county, which ends up being about 10% of the joint office budget. A big point of contention, city leaders say, the county uses some of the money to hand out tents to people living outside, which the city then pays to clean up when they sweep homeless camps. The city says they're bound by a settlement agreement to keep sidewalks clear of camps for people with disabilities. The county says handing out tents is a humanitarian response to this housing shortage. Portland had asked the county to come up with a policy around tent distribution, as well as one for harm reduction tools for drug users. And some city leaders say the county's not making enough progress. Here's what they said during council this week.
There's definitely been an improved reset, but it's going so slow. And so the truth is we have to collaborate on so many issues with the county, because that's just how it's set up. And so, of course, we're going to keep collaborating, but financial swaps with no substance, it's just time to move forward. There's just no reason to keep this non-joint office limping along with these type of conversations. We should be focusing on action and results and our mutual responsibilities to get that going along. And just remember that this is the taxpayers' money, and they asked us to provide services and move people off the streets and into shelter and into housing. That's it. It's not the county's money. It's not Metro's money. It's the taxpayers' investment.
Several city commissioners say they want to keep working together with the county on homelessness, but they don't want to have to buy a seat at the table.
There's no path forward on houselessness without a partnership with the county. However, our current partnership is not focused on the primary goal that this council needs to focus on, and that goal is reducing the absolute number of people who sleep on our streets every night. So I do believe it is time to hit the reset button in our relationship with the county. And in order to get from here to there, if that means terminating the current IGA and opening up a new one, I would very much appreciate the city attorney's assistance in moving in that direction.
Commissioner Rene Gonzalez agreed and formally asked the city attorney to draft an ordinance to terminate the IGA.
I have every confidence in our ability to work productively with our county partners. But without important and meaningful answers to the impacts of current policies on our small businesses, neighborhoods, and public right-of-ways, and without addressing very real concerns over the viability of a responsible handoff of successful run shelter sites to the county, we cannot simply push forward with things as they are. Things must change, and I believe we should have a serious conversation as a council about what the future of this partnership looks like in terms that meet both the needs of those struggling on the street, as well as residents who want to live in a healthy, safe, and vibrant city.
Only Commissioner Carmen Rubio opposed terminating the IGA. Mayor Ted Wheeler wasn't there, but he did say yesterday in a tweet that terminating the IGA would be short-sighted. Commissioner Rubio says she wants the city to stick around and keep trying to work things out.
I feel like we still do need to see this through. We still need each other. We're always going to be intertwined. So for me, the idea of the IGA helps us give us a table and gives us the parameters to have that conversation.
Ever since that discussion on Wednesday, Multnomah County Chair Jessica Vega-Peterson has been tweeting up a storm, calling the move a stunt by people who are trying to get your vote. 3 of the city commissioners are running for mayor, and Dan Ryan is running for city council. Vega-Peterson sent us a statement writing, "The majority of city council says they don't want to work with the county to end homelessness, the #1 issue our community cares about. That is the opposite of responsible leadership. When I'm faced with hard problems, I dive in and try to make the decision that will help the most people. This stunt does not and will not change the actual work we're focused on at the county to shelter, house, and support everyone in our community for a safer and better Multnomah County." The city's attorney says he can draft an ordinance this week and council can put it on the agenda. If it's approved, the city would have to give the county 90 days notice that they're terminating the agreement, and there would be a winding down process before it's all over. Meanwhile, we spoke to the head of the Joint Office of Homeless Services, Dan Field, who said the discussion around terminating the IGA is political shenanigans.
The entire city council is running for office, and I'll let them speak for themselves. Our job is to do the work, to keep our head down, to honor what the voters and taxpayers are asking us to do, to reach out to people who are living on the margins of our society, who may be homeless or at risk of being homeless, and to engage with them and bring them into housing and in some cases shelter. And we'll continue to do that.
He admitted that the Joint Office still has a tall mountain to climb when it comes to solving homelessness, but he says they're making the progress the city asked for.
We've hit a lot of those milestones and honored a lot of those commitments. We're certainly not there yet. We're not where we want to be. We still have people sleeping on our streets. We still have people unsheltered in our community. And we're going to work tirelessly until we have everybody off the street and into shelter or housing.
So what do you think? Do you think the city should pull out of funding the Joint Office of Homeless Services or try to stick it out and work together? Send us an email at thestory@kgw.com or leave us a voicemail 503-226-5090. Now let's take a closer look at 2 massive congressional races in our area, and more specifically, the money behind them. Oregon's 5th District and Washington's 3rd are both classified as toss-ups by the nonpartisan Cook Political Report. They could help shape the balance of power in the U.S. House of Representatives. Just this week, the campaigns filed their latest fundraising reports with the Federal Election Commission. Here's what we learned starting in Oregon. Democrat Janelle Bynum raised a massive $3.4 million from mid-July through the end of September. That's an Oregon record for the most money raised in a quarter by a federal candidate in state history. Such a huge haul of donations means Bynum has now raised close to $5.9 million in this race. Her opponent, Republican Congresswoman Lori Chavez-DeRemer, raised close to $1.4 million in this most recent quarter. Still a significant amount that would put her into the top 10 in Oregon's history for quarterly fundraising, but it was dwarfed by Bynum's total. In all, Chavez-DeRemer has raised about $5.5 million in her re-election campaign. That means Bynum has now outraised Chavez-DeRemer in this race for Oregon's 5th by about $400,000. All of these donations make this election for Oregon's 5th District in 2024 the most expensive congressional race in state history, at $11 million and counting. You might be able to tell by the amount of ads that you're seeing. As of October 1st, Chavez-DeRemer had an advantage in cash on hand available to spend, with about $1.6 to Bynum's $1.2 million. The Chavez-DeRemer campaign says Congresswoman Chavez-DeRemer has enthusiasm, momentum, and a significant cash on hand advantage entering the final weeks of the campaign. Oregonians will re-elect Lori Chavez-DeRemer to continue serving as a common-sense, solutions-oriented voice for them in Congress. The Bynum campaign told us this record-breaking fundraising haul further demonstrates the Bynum campaign's momentum and widespread support heading into the final stretch of the general election. Janelle has the funds, momentum, and support to defeat Lori Chavez-DeRemer for a 3rd time this November. Now let's move to Southwest Washington, where Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez is in a rematch with Republican challenger Joe Kent. The fundraising in this race is not close. Gluesenkamp-Perez raised about $3.2 million from mid-July through the end of September, pushing her total to more than $10 million in individual contributions and transfers. That's a massive number, the most for any federal candidate from Washington this election cycle, reflective of Democrats' hope to keep the seat in a 3rd district that leans Republican. Speaking of, Republican Joe Kent raised $886,000 in this most recent quarter, pushing his total to about $2.3 million this election cycle. That's about a quarter of what his opponent has raked in, and Glucingham Perez also holds a cash-on-hand advantage. I talked to Joe Kent about 2 weeks ago, who said he's ready to flip this seat. He told me he believes his campaign is better off financially now than they were 2 years ago, when he ultimately lost a very close race.
Well, unfortunately, in 2022, at this phase, we were flat broke. We spent all our money getting out of that really divided primary. We have a very unified Republican Party right now. We have for the last year or so. So I'm very grateful for that.
The FEC filings show most of Kent's donations have come through political action committees or transfers, while most of Glucingham Perez's donations come from individual donations. Her campaign spokesperson told us, Marie has built bipartisan coalitions in Congress to lower costs for families, secure the border, and protect our rights. Support for that work is reflected in the 39,600 unique supporters who contributed to Marie's campaign in the last 3 months alone. Money is one thing, voter turnout is another, and a presidential election year only adds to these expectations. Still to come on The Story, we're revisiting a woman whose landlord refused to do repairs on her home, sending it into squalor. Now she's filed a lawsuit after the situation escalated. We'll have details coming up. Welcome back. You might remember the story of Casey Jewell, a woman living in Vancouver in a rundown home because her landlord refused to do needed repairs after she fell behind on her rent. We brought you the story earlier this year, and it had a happy ending. She was able to move into a clean new home, but she's now suing her landlord, claiming the property owners charged her money she didn't owe and then added extra fees.
A Vancouver woman who lived in squalor with no heat or running water in her rented mobile home is suing her landlord. Casey Jewell claims the property owners unfairly charged her back rent, then tacked on extra fees before moving her into a new unit. Her attorney, Carl Snodgrass, is with the nonprofit Northwest Justice Project.
She's in a new place, but there hasn't been any accountability for what she went through for so long. The conditions that she was forced to live in.
We first met Casey back in February at a mobile home park north of Vancouver. The unit she was renting was falling apart, and no one would fix it.
Think people should be living in these kind of conditions? No. Nobody should be living in this.
At the time, she had no running water. The heater had broken, the toilet stopped working, and there was a hole in the kitchen ceiling.
Because when it rains, it drips. It's like got all these buckets.
Casey and her son had complained to management repeatedly, but nothing seemed to change.
And when you got contact with that certain, they're like, oh, we better do something.
Our story, along with public outcry, prompted her landlord to find Casey a new place to call home, just around the corner. But according to a newly filed lawsuit, it wasn't a smooth transition. Casey claims before she could move, the landlord demanded back rent and tacked on extra fees that weren't in her rental agreement. The lawsuit claims the owners, Hidden Village LLC and Home and Parks LLC, violated several state laws by renting her a unit that was unsafe and didn't have running water for 57 days.
I hope tenants realize that they have rights, that you don't have to live in unlivable conditions. You don't have to tolerate that.
Kyle joins me now. So Kyle, who owns this mobile home park?
Yeah, a couple named Michael and Denise Werner of Vancouver. We've actually reported on them before. In a separate case, they were ordered to pay nearly $1 million for unlawful eviction and utility shutoff at a different park in Washington state. We reached out to them and they didn't respond.
Okay. And of course, viewers may wonder at home too, how is she doing in her current living situation?
Yeah, I've been reaching out to Casey. She's doing okay in this newer unit, which is obviously much nicer. The old unit, they actually tore it down fairly recently.
Got it. Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate your reporting. When we come back, we're wrapping up our series on earthquakes in the Northwest and what a year of seismic activity around here is telling scientists about what we can expect for the future. Tonight we wrap up our Environment Northwest series, When the Earth Shakes. The Northwest is seeing a spike in earthquake activity from Mount St. Helens earlier this year to more recently Mount Adams in southern Washington. But could these quakes foreshadow something bigger? Savannah Welch talked to experts.
When you look at Mount Rainier, what you might not know is that at any given time, there are a number of small earthquakes happening, ranging anywhere from 0.5 to 2.0. Mount Rainier and other volcanoes in the Northwest are seeing more action, and scientists are watching.
The Pacific Northwest, especially west of the Cascades, is a real earthquake hazard zone.
The Northwest, also known as earthquake country. And in the last 9 months, that couldn't be more true. In September, there were 6 earthquakes at Mount Adams, which usually only sees one every couple of years. Mount St. Helens also made headlines with 350 quakes between February and June. And the biggest of 2024, July's 6.4 magnitude earthquake off Vancouver Island. But is all of this normal?
In terms of activity this year, I don't think there's much we've seen that would surprise us.
Jackie Kaplan-Auerbach is a seismologist and professor at Western Washington University in Bellingham. She says that while these earthquakes may be alarming, it's actually business as usual.
Sometimes when activity picks up, again, it's kind of on our minds. We get nervous that maybe this is, a sign that something bigger is coming. We have never, in sort of the history of studying earthquakes, seen patterns that indicate something larger is coming.
But scientists say that doesn't mean we shouldn't be prepared, especially for the big one.
In the future, we expect to have a very large earthquake that comes from offshore. The other side of the coin is that could happen anytime from literally tomorrow, but also 200 years from now.
University of Washington professor and director of the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network, Harold Tobin, says they're bracing for the potential for a 9.0 earthquake from the Cascadia subduction zone. He says that, along with past earthquakes like the 2001 Nisqually earthquake, are reason enough for people to be ready.
I think I kind of give us about a B to B minus for our increased preparedness. We're certainly better prepared than we were at the time of the Nisqually earthquake. Buildings are built better than they were back then. We should be doing a lot more of retrofitting of older buildings and making just all the systems that keep our cities and towns going more resilient.
New technology, especially artificial intelligence, is being used to detect earthquakes. Now, as for public warnings, these are critical. Wireless emergency alerts will be sent directly to your phone to warn those in affected areas. For Environment Northwest, I'm Savannah Welch.
Now, if you got one of those alerts, how prepared would you be? What would it look like if you had 2 weeks with no access to power, water, or trips to the grocery store? Erica Zuko finds out how some Northwest communities are preparing for the threat of the big one.
I have about 6 of these canisters ready.
Take a look at Frank Lawler's earthquake kit.
Crank radio. So power off, no problem. You just crank.
Or his binder full of contingency plans, and you may mistake him for someone who's always been prepared.
Oh, not at all.
But it was actually just in recent years he joined up with neighbors to create an emergency hub.
What's great about this is the better you know your neighbors, the better prepared you're going to be to work together to work through a disaster.
More than 50 grassroots groups of neighbors have created similar hubs across the city. One in a number of efforts that came after a wake-up call to the threat of the big one. Many residents remember the Nisqually quake in 2001, shaking much of western Washington, including downtown Seattle.
These will happen someday, and a lot of us have lost what that feels like since 2001, so we want people to know, we want people to be prepared.
Since then, the state has stepped up education efforts, holding drills to help prepare first responders, and using earthquake simulators to show residents how seismic activity would impact a home.
Despite the fact we will have an earthquake someday, and it will be a big and potentially life-changing event, you can survive if you take the action to get prepared now.
For each of us, a big piece of the puzzle is preparing emergency supplies, like Frank's. But for city governments, much of the focus is on finding and fixing vulnerable structures. In Washington, that means projects like retrofitting the Montlake Bridge on 520, upgrades to the West Point treatment plant to prevent sewage spills into Puget Sound, and updating the Green Lake Library. Records show there are still more than 1,000 unreinforced masonry buildings in Seattle, but many are privately owned. When Portland City Council tried to require seismic retrofits, it faced pushback from owners who said they couldn't afford the upgrades. Schools also need upgrades for seismic and tsunami safety, but with budgets tight and voters opposing many levies, some fixes still hang in the balance.
Back, protect your head and neck, please.
But most earthquake researchers say don't despair, prepare.
Our hub.
Do what you can, like in Frank's neighborhood, Madison Valley.
The neighborhood is going to be what keeps us together.
For Environment Northwest, I'm Erica Zuko.
Thank you very much. That is the end of our show. Thank you for watching. I'll be with you back here on Monday night here on The Story. In the meantime, you can stream The Story on your own schedule. Download the free KGW Plus app. Yes, free. Available now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. A great way to get access to our content when you need it, where you need it. Give it a shot.